Welcome to the Wodesman podcast, catching up with all things bushcraft, wild camping, and the great outdoors.
So hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Wodesman podcast. It's episode 31, as a matter of fact, so we're cracking on down the numbers. And I'm here with a good guest and great friend, Joe Price, and he's been a guest on multiple podcasts before, but we're trying to get Joe involved in some of the skills discussions, which is the aim for today. Coming into, again, the winter months, we're looking at how we can master the cold and our experiences to share with you guys, the listeners, about our tool choices, our experiences in the cold weather, and how we can make our time outside just a little bit more enjoyable. So really excited to share that with you, Joe. And I know you're a man who's in the cold weather a lot of the time. So
Too got that much.
It's going to be nice to have your point of view on it and, hear some of your experience. And like I said, some of your tool and kit choices. So it's great to have you on. How have you been?
I've been good. I've been dealing with the winter, and it's pretty cool to get on and talk to you about this because, it's a different perspective because there is, say, like Swedes who are born in this environment, like Ida. You know what I mean? She just gets up and she rolls forward through the house, and then she's perfectly set up for the winter. Whereas it was a bit of a learning curve for me. I had to hit the books and stuff like that, So it's been cool to learn it and amalgamate it, but then also be able to translate it out, because as you know, it's very hard for people who are grown in these environments that they just go, oh, it just works, it just does it, this is what we just do, you know what I mean? So it's been great to find out the reasons and the science behind it, you know what I mean? And stuff that they do instinctively, which we'll get into here. Like I've noticed, and we can talk about it, that tools automatically change, clothing size automatically, diet automatically changes.
Absolutely.
Whereas me and you, it's like -20 and I'm still going to the woods with my bacon sarnie in my house. Wondering why I've got stage 1 hypothermia on the way home.
It's hard to kind of translate when, just how there's such a nuance, and like you said, even diet and just an attitude of the outdoors to where you've been brought up. You can take things quite nonchalantly if you were a Swede out in the winter, where for us it's quite a big deal when it starts dropping below double digits.
Oh, it is it's
serious in the UK.
it is massive, because we deal with different kind of colds too, you know what I mean? It's been very UK-ish this winter here, and I've kind of been secretly happy with it, because now I've stepped into my own. I'm like, I'll show you how to deal with this type of winter. Watch this shit. You know what I mean?
I love it.
Yeah, because even a massive difference in that, in the sense of, like, in the UK and Ireland, in the British Isles, we call it that. I know people probably throwing stuff at the screen, but we're basically neighbors. We share the same weather system, so Absolutely. It's usually 80 to 100% humidity. You know what I mean? And then when it gets down to 0 and 1, with the wind factor too, it's a different type of cold. It's that cold that gets into your bones.
Yes, it really creeps in.
In Sweden, for example, or up in the Boreals, it's you're lucky if it hits like 5 or 8% humidity. So you don't have that moisture in the air.
That's a stark difference.
Yeah, it's a very, very stark difference. I mean, you can hear it in some of the videos that I put up when you walk around. Like, yourself, even if you're in a pine forest in the UK, in the wintertime, branches will still be kind of soggy. There'll be more ice on them, melty ice, for want of a better word, skräp, as it is in Swedish. But when I'm walking around the Boreals over here, it could be -20 and stuff it'll just snap. You know what I mean? It'll still be almost fine. It'll be cold, but it'll be dry. You know what I mean? So it's, again, a different attitude in the two things, So it's this winter now, it's been 80% humidity and rain, and like it's so cold some of the days with this, that even the brakes on my car are frozen solid in the morning time. So the handbrake is frozen because it's raining, so water's getting everywhere. I went out to the shed the other day, for example, and I opened the shed and I went into the shed and came back out, and the lock was frozen solid with the key frozen in the lock. So I had to, you're dealing with all that. But that's the kind of stuff that you kind of get used to in the UK, whereas it doesn't happen here. You have more chance of your key snapping with the cold than it actually getting stuck.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a whole different. There's a whole different aspect of the cold, which some people look at as one spectrum. They might think, "Oh, I'm prepared for cold weather," but as you quite rightly say, what kind of cold weather are you prepared for? There's a whole different kind of level of bushcraft when you go into even that cold weather preparation, which I hope this episode is going to kind of just give people a little bit of insight into as well. And I think then we'll also move into discussing the Helle Nordlys, which is an amazing tool, which is of course created for the North. And Joe, you've had some involvement with yourself.
Yeah, I'm dead proud of it, dude. Dead proud of the small amount of involvement that I've had with it. But it's made a difference. It's nice to leave that stamp, and it's been very well received. So it just to give people the spiel on the Nordlys and the genetics behind it is that Helle have a knife that's very traditional called the Laplander, which is a leiku. It's a big leiku.
Yeah, know it well.
Yeah. And leikus are meant for, like, one, they're a traditional knife. But if we put a very fine point on it, it's meant for like cutting frozen fish, cutting through seals, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. It's a Inuit based tool, or
it's
the most
kind of knife, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. It's kind of like a machete of the North, if you will.
Yeah,
Exactly. But unfortunately, the market, the worldwide market, when they see a big piece of steel like that, they very rarely put research into the origins of the knife. You know what I mean? And yourself, I mean, we've all been there. We've all gone and bought ourselves a machete and tried to take it out to an oak forest and just have a kind of you know what I mean? Do those kind of
terrain it's built for, exactly. It's not
exactly, yeah. And
it's perfect for bamboo, giant.
Chopping a few vines. If you want to smack a few hedges out of it, I mean, the old machetes are nice.
It's a brush tool, they're brush tools like the parang, but even then, that's got a different utilization because they're going through a bit more woody scrubland, So
yeah, that's it. It's a Filipino-based tool or a Philippines-based tool. So to counteract that, we were kind of like, right, well, here, look, Helle said that they need to kind of move a little bit around that space and redesign the Laplander for people like you and me who are not in those environments but still want a knife at those capabilities. So like the original kind of Leikus or Lapland knives, they're a flat ground. You know what I mean? They're a very machete style blade. So it was shortened. And you can't really shorten a blade. You have to work within proportions. You know what I mean? You can't just shrink it and make it pink. So
there's a point of balance in everything, isn't there?
There is, exactly. I mean, and that's the thing I like about working with Helle is that it's, although because their range is so vast, it may not seem like it, but they really sit down and look at the intended use. And especially me, when I design blades, I design them from the blade back. I don't design them from the handle forward. So I think the working edge in that and what it's intended to do is most important. So the Lapland then was reiterated to the Nord, given a full tang. The blade was straightened, steel was changed, and then the tang was changed. The biggest thing of all was the fact that now it's almost like a full tang leiku, if you will.
And just speaking out of first impressions with it, and I've only handled it for a few weeks, so I've still got plenty of dirt time to get with it. But just the feel of that handle. I know you said things work from the blade back, but it complements everything so well. Because obviously, as you say, it is an iteration of a larger blade, so it's that larger blade has to be. You have to feel secure when you're using it, and that little hook detail in the bottom of the handle gives you that. It just gives you a nice grip, and also the strength of it, the lightness of the piece as a whole. Everything works in harmony with it, and the finish, the glide on it when you're cutting through pieces, it all adds to the ease of using a big blade, which is one of the. There's so many big blades out there that are not easy to use as well. They're making it harder for themselves. Where that incorporated efficiency into kind of every angle of it. And that was just from, the small amount of dirt time that I've had with it so far. And of course, I'm not even doing big extended expeditions or long trips. I'm going out for
Mm.
a weekend or an evening or a day trip here and there. So
Yeah, yeah.
I can see the kind of work that's gone into it and the inspiration from the Leku. And was that something that when you were working on that, was it the obviously the traditional Leku, you wanted to keep the principles in there, but was there anything that you had to really seriously think about changing that put up a big kind of battle? But there was a bit of resistance there where it was like, do we change this or do we refine this or do we shrink down this? Because there's a
Yeah.
lot of things going on when you, like, as you said,
Mm.
when you're trying to scale something down for a different audience, but
It
try to
is.
retain that, genuine.
Yeah.
Not,
And you also don't want to you also don't want to step on the shoes of anything else that's in the range.
yes,
Like
yeah, of
and
course.
there is a knife that Helle make called the DD Gagool, which is a brilliant
I'm
one.
not familiar with it.
You'll love it, Liam. I'll get one sent to you. So uh, Helle's creation process is very different than most. So take the DD Gagool, for example. Rather than the boys in the office sitting down and just coming up with a concept, a trope, if you will, which is kind of very prevalent in the knife world where people would see it. Helle actually took their designer, flew him to Africa, and
Oh,
hooked them up with all the rangers. It's on their site, and they brought their files and their steel and their wood to the rangers in Africa, the conservation rangers, and said, right, let's just get this done. And in the field, they were able to take it up and test it and stuff like that. And they
with,
came up with what is personally one of my favorite 5-inch blades is the DD Gago.
I'm
Um,
just looking at it now, actually, on a separate tab. It's gorgeous, isn't it?
yeah,
Really.
exactly. So that is meant for like big game hunting, bit of self protection. It's very built for its environment. So as you can see with your Nordlys that you have, your because Lekus are naturally very thin. So you first don't want to step on something like the DD's toes because then you're just going to create the DD. You know what I mean? Which is already there.
Yeah, of
So you
course.
have to kind of give it a unique heritage. So what I loved about the Nordlys was that it took more of where Helle's at now in the sense of right, the DD was made in the field. It was like kind of the early third gen of the Helle knives.
Hmm.
We've now moved along so much further down the line in the creative process now with like almost difference between like an F-16 of the 80s to like a stealth fighter of the 90s. We can
Yeah,
do more, so let's do more.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's where
Use
you're
the innovation that we're blessed to have now to
yeah.
really excel what's already got a great backing in history with the heli, the heli.
Mm. And
Um,
it's also listening to end consumers. So if you look at the Laplander, um, it's a single handed it's a one grip use knife because it's traditional. They haven't got the tools
yeah,
to
of
be able to
course.
make it up there. So again, that's a beautiful thing on a knife that's paying homage to its origins. But is it practical for a woodsman? You know what I mean? So it's like no, and then it's
Yeah,
like right,
where it
well,
has to cross over being multi-purpose.
exactly. So rather than it being a new iteration of the Laplander, then it got inspired to be just a completely standalone blade. So now the
Yes.
handle, as you've seen, and on the Nord, it's a bit bigger again. It's Big Brother. So now the handle is a multi-grip, two-stage kind of handle, so you can use it in
Yeah,
different places. And that's been the biggest change of it all, to take it away from that traditional Leicu handle, which is just a full grip handle, to
yeah,
to an extended multi-use handle for woodsmen like ourselves.
yeah. And that's exactly what I found. Like, there's so many comfortable grips on it,
Mm,
and that, I guess you could call it. It's like a curved, slight pommeling at the end,
mm, mm.
where it spreads out. Even that for when you're chopping with it, and you
Mm,
can just get a little bit of extra momentum behind that swing.
yeah,
It's beautiful.
and inspired by axe
Especially,
handles. You know what I mean? It's
and
like
with your lanyard, the knife. It's a deadly thing.
it is. So it was that was kind of being the biggest change, and the rest of it is just kind of staying where it is, and then obviously taking away the flat grind into that. But also, and this all credit goes to a gentleman that works at Helle that doesn't get enough enough airtime for what he does. A guy called Jan Stefan,
Okay.
who is the production manager, but also one of the kind of like lead guys when it comes to because like say for example, I don't have any drawings here around me, but someone like myself or whatever may come along and say, "Oh, look, I sketched this," you know what I mean, and it should work in principle. But then he is the guy that makes it happen. So an awful lot of the magic, the balance, the handle shape, where the wood comes off, where the wood stays on, all comes from Jans Peters. And I have to say, I think it really shows because he was given full creativity when it came to that. And then the Leiku and machetes, and I'm sure you have used your machetes and stuff in your time, that
Yep.
the way throws it all off. So I'm a big believer in biomechanics.
Yep.
And people often overlook biomechanics, and they shouldn't, But
No, definitely not.
in anybody who's played drums will understand the analogy. But you've got so much muscles in your forearm and in your hands. So when you have those kind of leikus and those parangs, it's your forearm and upper arm muscles, and they're just getting so tired. You can't grip them with all these bits. So the inspiration is like it should be like a drumstick. If you're doing all these fine chopping bits, you don't want to have to use your lower arm for momentum and then your upper forearm to pull it back all the time. You're just going to get exhausted. You know what I mean? Because with machetes, you're using your biceps and your triceps, but these kind of 5-inch knives, you're kind of just, it's all in the wrist. You know what I mean? So
exactly.
so they like that balance then came from just some fantastic engineering. And like I said, now with the flat grind at 100 grams, I mean, it comes in around the same weight as like a more companion, but you have all that strength and durability and weight of a big 5-inch kind of tank of a blade. You know what I mean? Takes a little getting used to in a flat grind because we're all Scandi users, but it's there.
Yeah, definitely. A flat grind, really, really nice though. Like you said, it's good to get used to those different iterations of bevels as well. Because as one thing I noticed actually straight off the bat with the Helle, it's a very true traditional Scandi grind, and it was very evident as well. You could see that very slight double edge on the grind, and it was, or the double bevel, and it was it's really nice to see because so often knife makers don't get their grinds quite how they're meant to be, technically speaking. So it's nice to see they're doing a great job of that. And I guess
credit to Jans. Jans is the man for that.
I love that. I guess it's in its name, the Nordlys, meaning Northern Lights, and I guess it's kind of that rebirth of a design from the north, a very traditional knife from the north. So you've got the flat grind, you've got the Scandi grind, you've got the Nord, the Nord, which is the bigger brother of the Nord.
Yeah.
Am I correct? And is there two different grinds in the Nord?
Not at the moment. No, not at the moment, because the not in a flat grind there. It's the only iteration in the Nord is that there's special limited editions that have a micarta handle, but it's Scandi and Scandi only for the moment. It's such a big knife that I don't know. We'll have to see. It requires a bit more testing, but you have to be very careful that if you're going to make a flat grind version of like the Nord, people are then going to start winging it, and you have to be able to get that kind of tension right, because it's like flat grind blades are absolutely fantastic and strong. But you can, they definitely don't have that. It's not a chisel. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're not as robust. That's the thing.
Yeah, it's a scalpel.
I've noticed that actually with I've got a very traditional Anglo-Saxon sea axe. It's got a very, very flat grind on it, and although it's a great chopper, if you twist it at the last bit of the chop, by God, you can wreck that.
You'll remove it. Plus, then what people you want to think of the lifetime of it too. So, say for example, people can see this with their open L's and McTornoxes. That out of the factory, that's a real strong edge. You know what I mean? It's the best edge it can be. But as you use it, and as you sharpen it, and as you hone it at home, and as you strop it, that edge is constantly getting thinner and thinner. And anybody who has an open L or a Victorinox will know what I'm saying, because it'll be great, but then 2-3 years down the line, it'll be scalpel sharp. But then you'll notice parts of the edge will just start chipping away. It's just, nobody at home has those tools to maintain a You're basically going to tin it out over time. And, you have to kind of think about that in the lifetime of the product as well. You know what I mean? If you want to make something that's going to be a chopper, you want to make sure that it's more of a convex, so that way people don't just lose so much at the edge, because we want these knives to be able to, I mean, when I design knives anyway, to last for the lifetime that the user is going to use it for. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I guess that's like one of the biggest points we can move on into with winter gear and winter
Mm,
preparation. I
mm,
guess bushcraft essentials when you're out
yeah.
practicing it in the cold weather would be kind of tool preparation, and kit preparation. So it'd be great to hear as well some of your little points from this. But I wanted to have a little chat about some of the unique challenges we get when we're bushcrafting outside, which is not only about staying warm, which of course in turns building shelters and having the right gear with us, but it's
Mm.
about maintaining that gear and having the correct approach to that gear, because it's all too well and too common to kind of, we hear the saying too often, all the gear and no idea. Um, so is there anything that you would say just straight off the bat that would be your kind of one kind of main point about not over preparing for every situation and kind of
Mm.
focusing on the environment that you can expect where you are? Because like we spoke about earlier, um in Scandinavia you haven't got to deal as much with the wet kind of damp cold, so there's no
Mm.
point filling out your loadout, for example, with loads of wet gear, although it's going to have its own place, of course.
Mm.
Um, but is there anything that you would say to newcomers to wild camping in the winter,
Mm.
would be a good good bit of advice, as not to overload themselves when thinking about that? And I know that's a little bit of a kind of open question,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I had a great question though, one that warrants merit for thought. But as you know, that's what I always try and come. Even though I would consider myself very much on the way, if not already there, being a bit expert when it comes to the boreals, I still spent 6 years of my life in the UK and Ireland. So that's why I keep my journals,
very
because
damp neck of the woods,
oh
Ireland.
Lord, yes, it's practically Atlantis. So the the thing that I love about what I do, the thing that excites me the most is finding those universal bits. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Stuff like
Yeah.
that's what was so great about Moores and Lars Felt and everybody was, yes, they had books like Lars had the Winter Soldier, which was for the military, very niche, very winter survival in the boreals. But then he also had general outdoors books. So I do believe that there is this common ground that goes across. So all I would say to people is,
Right.
um, when they are tipping it. When it comes to kit, as in like tools, that the saws and all that still work fine. But the one thing that you should always be aware of is that the minute it gets into winter months, whether it's the UK or the Boreals, nothing's ever dry. Your tools are never dry. Because in the summertime we have this tendency that we'll make a feather stick or we'll carve a little spoon or whatever, and then the knife just goes back in its sheath and all's good and all's well that ends well. But in the winter time, that is not the case. Get into the if you can establish the habit of just, you don't have to do it while you're working. I'm not saying that everybody has to do, every time you use your knife you got to maintain it 100%. But at the end of the day, taking your stuff out and making sure that it's dry is a gift.
That's a great
Whether
point.
it's in Sweden, for example, the snow here is very dry, but you'll be chopping away and you won't think anything about it or whatever, and you'll put it back in your knife sheath, and then all of a sudden you'll take your knife out and it'll be soaking because
Yeah.
it's naturally going to melt
Yes.
when it's next to your
Yeah,
body.
and the leather absorbs it, I guess, at that point,
Exactly.
and then
Yeah,
you're
and
on a
then
losing battle.
it is, and then that happens as well. That, like, when you're inside a tent and you got those two different vapor layers, so you get that kind of
Yep,
condensation. That happens in your sheets. It happens in your knife sheet.
it
You're using
does.
your knife, and your knife will be stone cold. You're putting it back in a warm knife sheet that maybe has absorbed a lot of moisture from the air anyway. So just double checking, at the end of the day, that your stuff is dry will save you a lot of hassle when it comes to your tools. It's one thing that should automatically change in the winter months anyway, when it's a bit
Yeah,
more damp out there. And that's the same reason when people come home and things might look dry, and then they put their knife away in a drawer, and then they come back to it 3 weeks later and it's rust as shit.
yeah. Oh
It's
yeah,
not.
being guilty of it, but that's a really, really good point because, just little small things like checking is probably one of the most overlooked important parts of tool maintenance. You
Mm.
can often think, oh, it's covered, it's in its sheath. But
Yeah.
you know, very good points there, because it is often, in whatever kind of cold situation, damp mitigation is one of the biggest things you're trying to avoid, whether you're in a dry, cold environment or a cold and damp environment. It's there's always that presence of moisture, and once that creeps in, it's incredibly hard to get rid
Oh, it
of.
is. It
And
is, and it's
carpets become impossible to dry, don't they? For example, it's
they do, and people have this in them already. Like people out there, like one of the first things you learn about boots is to not get into your sleeping bag with the socks that you've been wearing over the course of the day, because even though they might feel dry, there's still moisture
oh
absorbed
yeah,
into
that
them, you know.
that perspiration has to go somewhere, doesn't it?
It does, and people just haven't reflected that to their attitude towards the tools. You know, I mean, maybe because it's not so devil may care, but it's naturally going to happen. I mean, I've seen it in cabins here in Sweden, and where people would come in, and we'd all come in from being outside, and we'd start the fires and stuff, and you would see the condensation, the dew building up on the axe heads, and you'd see the dew building up on clothes as it just comes up to temperature. Because I mean, sometimes you could, me personally, like it could be -20 when I'm out working. So there's no way that my knife isn't down towards, 0 degrees, you know what I mean, leaving it on benches, sticking it in snow, driving it through wood. So naturally it's going to take a while for that steel to come back up to temperature in the room, and you're going to get that. I used to know the name of it, where you got,
Well, it kind of reaches dew point, doesn't it? There has
yeah,
to be.
yeah. But there's there's a special. That's actually going to wreck my head, because there was a scientist that came. In fact, the Peltier effect. There we go. Yeah, that's it. You know, when you have a room dehumidifier, it has a hot plate and a cold plate, and that's how it sucks the moisture out of your air and stuff like that. So yeah,
Yes.
you can start getting that Peltier effect on your tools, and they are no different. So what I do to mitigate that is, I've just trained myself at the end of the day, which is always a good idea, is to put your sharps away, your tools away before it starts getting dark. You start getting into maybe the
Oh
the
yes.
the strong tea. You know what I mean? So
Never the
I
time.
like it. Yeah, I like to just sit around the fire, take a bandana out, just dry stuff off and whatever else, and sit it in the tent and so on. That's the
Yeah.
one thing I would do, because I know everybody out there knows about socks and having dry base layers and stuff, but when it comes to tools, they're often overlooked. And then
Well, we have
before you
we
know it,
have to
you're
look at
risking.
ourselves as craftsmen, don't we?
Yeah,
And there's that old saying: if a craftsman doesn't look after his tools, he won't look after his work. So
that's true.
you'd often see my dad at the end of a work, even in the workshop, spend the
Mm,
last 5 minutes just there, just nicely reflecting over the day, polishing his, wiping his tools with a bit of like an oily rag at the end of the day.
yeah,
And I always brought that back home. That if you're relying on something, and it's why I've always loved the ethos that people like Ray Mears have taught, that if there's a tool that you're relying on that warrants its respect, and that becomes as much of you as your skill set and your knowledge.
mm,
So yeah, it's a very, very good point, and I really like that, and I think it um, leads really nicely into the next point that I wanted to make, which was just maintenance of gear. Because quite often I see people, and they've forked out on a lot of expensive gear, and I know you
mm.
all know too well, listeners and yourself included, Joe, that gear for the outdoors can be quite pricey at times, and
Oh,
for good reasons, because you want it to protect you when you're in
mm,
extremes. You want it to be um, proficient at keeping you protected outside, and you also want it to not inhibit you in any way. There's all too much gear out there that's fantastically waterproof, but it's just loud and noisy or over cumbersome. So there's that happy medium with outdoor gear that generally good gear is fairly well priced, and
mm,
people go out and they happily spend it and
mm.
never do the maintenance on it. They don't reapply the correct waterproofing agents or the
And it's
right
a
way.
brilliant point. I mean, most people don't
Stand
realize
really
that.
close-
Yeah.
Yeah, stand really close to the fire, and
Mm,
all too well, for good reason. We want to get nice and warm, but that has a detriment to the fabrics that maybe then afterwards you need to then say, I probably need to put the waterproofing agent on, and not be
mm.
like, oh, I got wet on my next trip. I'm throwing these away. And it's like,
And then also realizing that things like like Gore-Tex and stuff. I mean, I've got into so much trouble on this on forums, but like again, and I like that idea you have of this not overloading people, just something. And because I believe that's how you get real change. You
Yes.
don't just go to the gym and run 20 miles, mess yourself up, and then never do it again. You start off with walking a mile or two, and then eventually you build up to
Yeah,
it.
of
So
course.
I do
Although if
believe
you
that.
start with 20, you'd never do one again.
Exactly. But it's the one thing that I see all the time, and it's at classes, forums, festivals. I mean, and I think we've all been there, but have you ever been to a camp with someone? It's the winter time and it's cold, and they take their sleeping bag out, and you're like, oh geez, that looks a bit flat. When was the last time you watched that? Oh no, it's been in the closet for 7 months. And it's like, well, you're instantly doing it a disservice. What? Just basically washing your clothes at the right temperatures and stuff, and
Yes.
washing your sleeping bags keeps them up at that 100%, or at least close to 90% rating, especially
Yeah.
if it's down. If there's too many,
That
and then
must-
they're always the people that sleep cold, the people that or the guys and girls that have just thrown their sleeping bag in the wardrobe, have used it 4 or 5 trips. I mean, you don't realize the amount of sweat that comes out of you and dirt that comes out of you when you sleep.
Exactly.
And that all lessens the effects of everything you do. And like, even if you are wearing something like Gore-Tex, you would be surprised at just how much, like you said, very brilliantly, Liam, that like if you're sitting on the ground and stuff like that, that these dirt particles are getting in between the membranes and the fabrics
Yeah.
and stuff.
You're
So
clogging it up.
yeah, all of a sudden it don't work. So it's a silly thing, but I mean, I'm accustomed to it myself. I mean, you're a tradesman too. I mean, if my Snickers trousers got washed once every 2 weeks, it'd be a miracle. You know what I mean?
When they get dusted the next day, you're like,
You're just like,
you're
I'll wash.
heartbroken, like ruining the washing machine, don't you?
That's it. All of a sudden, there's screws and fuses flying around the washing machine. But I was guilty of that with my outdoor equipment, and it was only when that I started to go to these like lectures and stuff on like actual fabrics and how they work, and that did I realize that just simply washing your clothes before a trip puts
Yeah.
them back on par. Especially sleeping bags,
Yeah, and the manufacturers always will give you guidelines on that, and it'll always be the recommended kind of wash cycles, or if it's for boots, the right agents to put on to keep it waterproof or keep
Mm,
it supple. Because quite often, leather as well. When we're out by the fires, that can dry out, and once leather
viciously.
dries out, you're kind of losing the battle at that point.
Yeah.
That conditioning of the fibers, the structure just starts to break down. So keeping on top of it is the best thing we can do,
Mm,
um, and it's often the cheaper alternative because, like you
yeah.
said, it can not only be the fact that you're wearing off that coating, like a protective Gore-Tex coating, but you could be just clogging it. So, um, and again, synthetic fibers in sleeping bags. I know my Corinthia Defense 4, for example,
Beast of a bag.
yeah, great winter bag. And I know, you know, exactly what you're saying. The synthetic fibers in that, I can imagine if they start getting coated in loads of materials, it's going to make them not compress or not loft up, sorry, as
Yeah.
much, which means the compression of the bag's just going to stay nice and flat. I always keep mine actually in a lofting bag in the
Yeah.
wardrobe, but it's a
Mm.
very good point, and just washing them probably once or every 2 or 3
Yeah,
trips. And
I know there's because I mean I only know because I'm guilty of it myself, but I'm willing to bet you out there now there's people who have sleeping bags that probably couldn't remember the last time they washed them. Because you
yeah,
just have that attitude. It's like, oh, I only spent like 4 or 5 hours in it. I'll hang it up, let it air out a little bit, which is great for it. But
yeah,
it,
definitely.
it was only when I have 2 bags. I have the Defense 4 like yourself, and I have the Rab Ascent 700 because I like having the two options.
Yeah, of course.
And the Rab is my baby because it cost me a kidney to get it. And it's I use it in the heavy winters as well.
Like
Paratex, it's a
isn't it?
sexy bag, but
Yeah,
I also put it inside my Defense 4 in the real heavy winter months.
beautiful,
But
toasty.
oh yeah, very very toasty because it gets cold here. So but the one thing that I was just always it stopped working even in the summer months. I found that because I sleep pretty cold, I found that I was getting chilly. But then a
Yeah,
guy turned around to me and he's like, "Have you actually washed it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I washed it like once, I think, when I actually got it properly.
yeah,
I spilled a load of coffee all over it, so it had to be washed." And he's like, "Yeah, but did you use down? Did you put tennis balls in the washing machine with it? Did you let
yeah.
it dry out?" And I was
Point.
like, that's a bit fancy, you know what I mean? But I actually went and did it for my
Heard of
sim.
it.
Yeah, I throw tennis balls in with it just to get it going on a really low wash and just let it do its thing. But then all of a sudden, then it was brand new. And then I swore blind then afterwards that I was going to stay on top of these things, because then finally it puffed up like almost half an inch more than it normally did, and I was like, this is fantastic.
Yeah,
So
brilliant.
something so simple as just washing your gear, either when you come home, or which is not practical because we're always shattered when we get home. But
No,
washing your gear before you go out on a trip
yeah,
is
putting it on the list.
a great tip.
I think. Yeah, because again, a lot of people might not really know about a lot of synthetic fibers in higher end synthetic sleeping bags. Yourself,
Mm,
you know, Joe. It's just it's they're based on the reindeer fiber or
there.
the reindeer hair, so there's this hollow synthetic fiber
Mm,
that creates that insulating um, space within the sleeping bag, and it's very well engineered. But if those start to get clogged up or again caked, so the fibers are actually compressed down,
mm.
it's just not going to do half as well of a job. So um, I will definitely put that on one of my top tips in the show notes for the listeners there. Washing sleeping bags. That's a really fantastic point.
It
Well done,
is.
Jack.
Yeah, no, sleeping bags and jackets, like you said, it does no harm to give them a quick wash, and they'll
Yeah.
be. If you haven't in a year or so, if you do wash them, you'll notice the difference almost immediately when you go out to the field. It's like having it brand new from the shops again.
It's funny you say that. Actually, I washed my bivy bag because of a spill, like you said, and
Mm,
I was amazed at suddenly the uh, the hydrophobic quality to the bivy bag again after
hmm
cleaning it. So, like the dirt was, it was obviously the dirt was just making that water stick and puddle in certain areas.
mm,
So it can really interrupt that. Is it lamellar flow of
hmm
water? That
Lamina flow.
starts
Yeah,
to laminar flow. Yeah. So it's amazing at just what dirt can do to that for waterproof gear. Which
mm,
again, something I've been using recently is the Bearskin version 4, which is
looks great.
yeah, it's got a rain jacket outside, but the hydrophobic quality on that was insane. But I remember I got it a bit muddy on one section, and that was the only section on the whole jacket that the water was hanging onto. So it really makes a great point for that.
Yeah.
Just keeping on top of those bits, and again in winter, that could change a hell of a lot of an experience if your sleeping bag is underperforming. Like you said,
Mm.
it can make for a whole different experience when you're outside. Have you got any anecdotes about that? I guess you gave us one there when you just washed your sleeping bag. For your
It made a massive difference. The other one as well was a good one of the biggest
your back one,
learning. One of the biggest learning curves that I had was when I first came over here. I had a pair of Lundhags, and they were a half size bigger, and I layered up with the socks. But by God, my feet just kept getting cold. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It, it happened in Ireland when I was out hunting. You get those dewy mornings. It just moisture would get in. But over here, standing in even dry snow, which could be, geez, sometimes this could be like a quarter of a meter deep. Especially if I'm shooting YouTube videos, I could be standing out for 4 or 5 hours.
yeah,
And
of
unless you
course.
got that blood flowing all the time, it tends to just start to go back. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what was happening. So then because I can understand people being a bit afraid of this, because I was afraid of it.
Yeah,
But then I found myself a good pair of like calf high boots, my muck boots being one of them. And then what I did with my Lundhags was I actually went a full size bigger in
yes.
that. And then I wore a thin sock, a very thick wool sock, but then I still had that beautiful layer of air around
Okay.
around it. And because you think you only need a little bit of air, but
No,
I haven't had cold feet since. Now it feels a bit unnatural walking around in shoes that are a size too big for you, but by God, I've never had cold feet since, and that
that's
was
brilliant.
probably one of the best lessons, because yourself, once parts of you start to get sore, it's
Oh
almost
yeah.
like having a pain in your tooth. It's not going to affect you, but it just wears that mental state down all the time.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, that could be the breaking factor between going out the next time, especially if
Mm,
they're new to the outdoors or
yeah.
haven't experienced cold weather camping. So that's a great point because people often take for granted that it's air that's actually doing the insulating, or
Mm,
the material is there to create the space for the air to
yeah,
insulate.
and that's that. It came to me from, the buffalo jackets. You know those buffalo
Yes.
jackets. I mean,
Yeah.
I absolutely adore them. It's my top tip for anybody coming to the winter. But because I wasn't aware of this multiple size thing, I was in Finland 5 years ago, and I was with Savoda, and they wanted to go ice fishing. They were like, "Oh, when you visit a factory, they're like, let's go do something traditional while you're here."
Yes.
So we're like,
Love-
let's go ice fishing. It was like ridiculously cold. And there's pictures of me. I got my buffalo jacket on. I got my trousers on. I had my super heavy base layers. I had my muck boots. But I was still so cold. You know what I mean? I was all right because there's two different setups when it comes to clothing. There's high activity, and that's where
Yeah.
you kind of want that kind of skin tight, kind of base layer kind of vibe going on. But then there's
Yeah,
low
absolutely.
activity clothing, and that I didn't realize. So I show up and I got my buffalo on. I got the best of gear, and some of the other guys too. But then the local lads, they showed up in grey tracksuits. I actually had to take a picture of this because nobody would believe me. But he just showed up in a big Aran knit woolly top with a belt around it, and those
Yeah.
grey hip hop Eminem kind of tracksuit trousers, and a set of wellies. And the dude was A1, you know what I mean? And I was and I was
Yeah.
like, and not a bother to him, big set of mitts on him. And like I
Yeah,
said, I
you've
took
got
a
all this
picture.
moisture wicking type thing.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. So I said,
You're
what
not
is the
actually sweating at all.
no, he was sound,
You're
but the
just
thing
constricted, like.
yeah, but I actually looked at the locals then, and I noticed the
Yeah.
locals all had like, say they have a boot on, but then their trousers, they'd be like Cossacks. The trousers would just be so wide and
Yeah.
so lofty, and I thought to myself, that has to be it. It's the clothes are there to just capture, but the more air and the more fluffiness you like. That's why
Yes.
puffer jackets work. People think that puffer jackets are so tight to their skin, but the puffer jacket's this thick with air.
Yeah.
You know
Exactly.
what I mean? So I thought to myself, right, well, do as the locals do. So then I went out and I got myself, and you see me wear them a lot in the woods now. I went out and got triple XL jumpers, and I got
Yes.
trousers that were like a size too big for me as well. And all of a sudden, the amount of cold that I had to deal with was a lot more manageable. You know what I mean? Plus, it also kept uh, the wind away from that from the skin. So that's where I
Yes.
was going with that. It's not just going up a size in your boots, going up a size in an anorak. I mean, if you look at like that, if you look at any of the Inuit people from up north, they always have that classic belt, but the anorak is massive. And I always
Exactly.
thought,
Yes.
yeah, well, they're not. It's not Savile Row tailors. You know what I mean? They're just doing it. But the science behind it is that you
Yeah.
want these big puffy jackets. The more air you
Exactly.
can keep between you and out there. So don't be afraid to go up a size in a jacket. Don't be throwing 20 layers on. You're not going
No.
to, don't put your base layers and then a t-shirt and a tight hoodie and then a jacket and then,
Yeah.
if you can get a good outer garment that's a couple sizes too big for you, the difference it'll make is
You're
unbelievable.
right. And it's funny how that crosses over to the and just quickly touching on this because obviously we're complete wrong season. It switches over and over to the hot weather as well. People often think the less you're wearing, the cooler you'll be. But there's a reason why the Arabs have developed very acute layering systems of
Mm,
long covering garments to keep airflow in there but keep the sun off of them, so it's
yeah.
very much playing on the same principles,
Mm,
obviously with different thicknesses and different materials and different
mm,
end goals, but heat preservation and temperature regulation, I guess, is
mm.
the aim of it all. And it's funny how you said that the locals in their tracksuits and
I swear to God, there's pictures on my Facebook page. You can
I
see me next to
love
this dude, and he looks like he's just woken up out of bed. You know what I mean?
it.
And his clothes are so big and fluffy on him. But we were out on that lake for 4 hours, and
Yeah,
and he was just in. Now he had a really thick base layer on him. He had a really thick wool base layer on him. But then the rest of his clothes were just loose and baggy. And unlike like you said, which is a great comparison, so maybe people can visualize it in their heads. But in the Arabian countries, they're lighter fabrics. But if you notice, there's no belts, so that the wind can
exactly.
come and remove
Freeze
the hot
dry.
air from body. Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the winter months, they'll have hip belts and they'll have elasticated belts and they'll have their trousers tucked into their boots because you want to trap that warm air. And if you understand that principle, you'll be golden. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's funny how like places like the Aran Islands, they develop certain weaves for different parts of different parts of times of the year,
Mm,
to allow that air to free flow maybe through and denser weaves for the winter months where they wanted to retain it and keep that in. And obviously they were working with some incredible wools, which are great insulators anyway. And I'd always say that, probably one of my fondest memories of the cold would be, and it actually happened fairly recently, and it's an anecdote about gear and how gear can also lead to difficulties if you allow it. Hot tent camping, hot stove camping in a lavoo, Polish lavoo, lovely, really toasty and warm. It was, I think, -5 or 6 outside, really nice blanketing of snow, beautiful, like the perfect scenic Christmas camp. And there I am, I've got my Defense 4 bag, which is probably a bit too much for considering I'm a hot tent camper, but you have to then
Never enough.
you have to bring into the account that it might not be lit when you wake up in the middle of the night or in the morning.
Exactly.
But that's actually what caught me out. So had the fire going lovely and really nice and toasty, and you're laying there and the sleeping bag's not open, you're just on it basically. And you drift off to sleep and you wake up about 5 in the morning like shivering and absolutely stone cold because you never got into your bag because it was too warm. So there's a very fine line when you're going out camping on, my point was being over warm. A lot of people can get kind of obsessed with this case of, and you said it earlier before, putting on too many layers, and it can sometimes lead to very serious consequences, especially if you then start to sweat and your gear's starting to get wet that you're going to rely on for later down the road and in longer trips.
And psychologically too, like one of the things that I mean, naturally everybody's afraid of being cold. Your body doesn't want to be. It's trying to protect you. Everybody would rather get a little bit warmer because it's a bit easier to cool down. But then how I got around that was, especially when I came to Sweden, because I'd have to go out and chop wood, and you still live here. I mean, I still got to go to the store. So what I started to do, and it's how I kind of started easing into overnight solo camping as well, just in general. But I started going for walks, so I would try different things out.
Nice.
Because you hear some people say, "Oh, we'll start doing plunge pools or cold showers," but that's okay because you're having a quick sudden shock. But you want to get yourself used to the fact that you're not going to die over losing heat over a long period of time, or that you can mitigate it. So an awful lot of the early trips when I started coming to Sweden, like 10 years ago, was just me going out into the woods, not too far from my car. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and then saying, right. Challenging myself to like leave a layer of clothing in the car, see how I could manage it. Could I make it 3 or 4 hours? Start getting cold. All right, I'll do a bit of work. I'll build a fire, and eventually you're just trying to get over that hump. You always want to be aware of it, but I think when people are afraid of the cold, they can almost compensate and put themselves into a different place. You're not watching. You're sweating. You're getting into your sleeping bag, and naturally you want to have like 20 layers on you when you're getting into your sleeping bag, or you're keeping close tight to your skin and layering up, or spending even too long by the fire. You don't want to spend so long by the fire. Just before you go to bed, it's great, but you don't want to keep going to the fire and back to the fire and go. You start to mess up your endocrine system then, and you can't keep on top of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's all too easy to, if you're in a cold environment and, like you said, you're spending too much time right next to the fire getting warm, actually any time you're away from the fire is going to feel awful.
It's going to be terrible. It's like getting out of a hot bath into a cold house constantly. Yeah, and then you can actually feel that happen, and that's what I mean about messing up your endocrine system, because it's all worked, like your internals are like a Gore-Tex jacket.
It's all regulatory system. Yeah,
exactly. So you can imagine if the front of you is scorching and the back of you is cold, your endocrine system is trying to do all sorts of shit.
Where am I?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what am I doing? Or if you sit by the fire, get really toasty in all your layers, and then you get up and walk away from it. Like, if you know yourself, if you've ever been and it happens when people go on vacation, that they they go to the beach and get lovely and toasty and warm, and then they come into air-conditioned rooms, and then they go back out to the beach, and then all of a sudden they're like, God, I feel awful and I'm exhausted and it's like I've got the flu. It's not. That's just your endocrine system being completely shot, and that will do that in the woods. Like when I'm out in these temperatures, I tend to have a little fire going
Hmm.
just so I can keep a warm brew. Great to have a warm brew. But
Yeah,
whenever I start to feel cold, I actually just try and get up and do a bit of work.
do
You know what I
something.
mean? Or I try and move around a bit just to regulate that. Then in the evening times I'll sit by the fire because naturally it's colder just before I jump into my sleeping bag. But as I
Yeah,
sit around the fire, I'm taking layers off. Because it's the same principle that that an awful lot of people do. But
you're not trying to warm up the layer, are you?
no, but also as well as your body's kind of producing this heat anyway. So what I like to do is I'll take my layer off, which is again a fear that people have to get over. I'll take my outer layer off. I'll go chop some wood. I'll readjust my guy lines. I might take a walk. I'll do something like that. And then when I get back to camp, I've built up this heat. Then my jacket goes back on. It's the
Yes.
same like you. I see it so many times that people get into their car, their air conditioned car, they got their jacket on, they got their hat on, and they whack the AC up and they're driving to town. And then they get out of the car, they're like, oh my God, I've got a jacket on, but I'm freezing. But it's because your endocrine system doesn't know what to do. It's trying to cool you down in this jacket while you're in this AC car. You know what I mean? So it's just these little habits and tips and tricks I've picked up that you'll see in all my videos. When I am out in the winter time, sometimes I'm only just in my t-shirt and a hoodie. My big jacket will just be off screen because I'm mincing around. But then
Yep.
as I start to cool down, I throw my big jacket on to trap that warm air that I've built up. So it's counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you think about it that you don't want to spend all day around the fire in your layers as much as you want to just stay. It's you're going to have that hot bath, cold house kind of scenario over and
Yeah.
over again. And getting into your tent will be torture. You know what I mean?
And there's literally nothing worse than putting yourself through that mental turmoil of when you're having a walk in somewhere and you're suddenly like stripping layers off because you're overheating, and then you get a little bit further and you're like, oh, now I'm cold, and you're putting another layer back on. And it's so mentally draining as well, like stopping and starting like that because of little things that can easily be solved, like
Yeah.
let's say straps not being adjusted right on a bag, making your time easy outside. And again, it goes back to what you said, going on these little excursions just to
Mm.
test yourself and say, well, okay, um for example, this time I'm going to leave the jacket behind, see how I get on. I love that
Yeah.
idea because it gives you the space and the freedom safely to do it, and
Mm.
make your time out next time
Hmm.
more rewarding. And it is always that you're building up on and reinforcing things that you've done on
It
previous
is.
trips. What
Like
the
there's
whole
a
challenge
great bit
is.
of research, and that's what I think is beautiful about this conversation, Liam. I just don't want to go across it, but I actually have the research here. I wish I had a set of glasses to make me look more official that I could put a set of glasses on. But not there yet, thankfully. And this is directly from Lars Felt. But modern research shows that your clothing is only 30% of you staying warm outside. The other 70% is environmental factors, which you can also call experience. And that's from the big man himself.
Love.
So,
Yeah.
it's great to talk about the clothes and stuff like that. But like you said, it's it's the experience of your just hours out in the weather. Don't be afraid of it. I had to I used to be deathly afraid of because in Ireland, you know yourself in the UK, it's not so much -20 you're dealing with, it's getting
Yeah.
wet and then getting cold. You know what I mean? And that
Yes.
was a big fear of
It's
mine.
a shortcut to hypothermia.
It is a very fast, it's a very fast road trip, but naturally you're going to have to learn how to mitigate this with your clothes, with fire. So I calculated that I was losing 30% of my available woods time because I was not going out when it was raining or going out even with the tread of rain. So then I said, right, we'll start in the car park and we'll put a rain jacket on. We'll see how it goes. I'll bring dry clothes with me. I'll try get my fire skills up and stuff like that. And then eventually, I just didn't. I don't care. It could start raining now tomorrow, and
Yeah.
I'd be fine because
That's
the
me.
experience, like Lara says, your clothing is 30%, but your experience in that clothing is the other 70% that keeps you warm.
Yeah. And actually, one thing you just reminded me of there, which might be a nice takeaway for listeners to wrap up this little section, is don't underestimate the power of the dry sack. In
Mm,
fact, my sleeping bag, regardless of if it's in a compression sack or not, whenever it's in my backpack, it's in its own independent dry sack.
hmm
That has basically become its compression sack. And the reason I do that is just for peace of mind that if it's torrential rain and my backpack cover gives up, or if I don't get my backpack cover on in time,
hmm
or if I fall in a river, or if
hmm
I fall in a puddle, or whatever happens, where I'm going to be able to sleep is also always dry, and
Yeah,
within that, that's also, it can be a survival blanket if I need it to be.
of
It can
course.
be,
But an awful lot of people, and it's
and
again
it's
why I love
overlooked.
them on the podcast, is because you just talk sense here, stuff that you don't hear talked about all the time. And I would agree with you 100%, because I agree that your knife is important, your clothes is important. But in a survival scenario, no one ever talks about, like, I carry sleeping bags. If I'm going out for a hike, you know what I mean? You'll always see me with a big, and I'll carry my sleeping bag, and bivy will be in a dry bag, just like yourself. Even
Yeah,
if I'm not planning on staying out, because
exactly.
I read rescue stories, and there's been a lot of them as of late, which is kind of sad. But I read rescue stories like the way, like the way you know, middle aged ladies watch true crime drama. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? I consume a fair amount of it, and so many of those situations wouldn't have been as unbearable if they were up the side of a mountain, or they got lost for 2 or 3 days because they went off piste. A sleeping bag, I mean, it's one of those things as well that, like, Morris Kahansky talks about so much, but people just don't listen because they want to hear all about the knife, and they want to hear all about the saw.
yeah,
But he puts so much, even when in his shelter videos where he's showing off, oh, this is the Morris Kahansky super shelter, but he's like, all this, he says that you got to set your system up two ways. You either have clothing and skills based, where you plan on building up, or you have a system built around your sleeping bag. And your sleeping bag should be the main center point
yeah.
of survival in the cold weather. Because if you have, like me, the Defense 4 that you have, a good
Yes.
solid Gore-Tex bivy bag, and maybe a smaller summer bag to go inside that Defense 4, like,
Yep.
if you get lost, I mean, you're just in that, and you just zip that bad boy up, and
Yep.
you're going to be good.
Spread it out.
Yeah, that's it. And then so it's something that people can have a look at for the colder months, because people very rarely make that switch. In the winter times, I switched to a sleeping bag based survival system rather than
Yes.
a
Yep.
skills based
Likewise.
survival system. That I would have in the summertime.
Yeah, well, I'd even say, people often, I think, blimey, 40% of your kit is almost like the sleep system.
It's,
I'm like, man, it's probably the whole kit is like based around this.
That's it. It's my winter kit is basically like, my sleep system and a can of spam. That's kind of that's what I
Yeah,
do.
it's like my 45-liter backpack is great as the Wii Sport fantastic bags,
Mm.
and it's perfect for summer weekend, like 3-day trips. But in winter, that becomes like just basically a sleep system carrying
That's all
vessel.
it is. I've done videos on it too. I used to have a Kaika 100 liter, and side pocket was food, side pocket was water, and the whole centerpiece was just my sleep system. Because,
Yeah,
I mean, it's I wouldn't say it's common sense, because I don't blame people for taking the knowledge that's out there. And sleeping bags are expensive, but nothing makes me happier than when you see people show up and they've actually put a bulk of their money into having a proper sleeping bag with sleeping equipment and stuff. Because, like, as well, in any scenario, especially when it comes to the cold, your sleeping is so important. Because, like,
you need rest.
yeah, well, I mean, on an average day of high activity in the summer, you're going through 900 calories at
Mm,
rest. You know what I mean? And in the cold at rest, you'd nearly want to double that. You know what I mean? Because
yeah,
it's
I
like
can
a train burning extra cold. So having that sleeping bag system, so you can get a good night's sleep and be warm, would be fine. And I know I would be thankful of it if I was. I've just heard so many stories from rescue people. There's an anecdote that I can say before I leave this situation. But I had a friend who was walking across the Wicklow Moors, which is it's like Wales. It's a beautiful, beautiful terrain, but horrible. You know what I mean? Weather was.
It is harsh, muddy, and damp. That's the
It
thing
is,
about.
and he was hiking with a friend, and his friend twisted their ankle. I won't name names, because they ended up having a fist fight the following morning. But
Oh no.
he twisted his ankle, and he's like, "Here, look, I can't walk anymore." It was getting too dark. There was no reception. You know what I mean? They said, "All right, well, we'll just get into this crag here, and we'll be fine." They weren't too far from the road. Call it what you will. But thankfully, he had that sleep. He had a sleeping bag based survival kit, and he just got into a sleeping bag, and he got into his bivy bag, and he just zipped it up around his head, and they stuck into the crag. And I'm sure things had gone. He's a mountain guide, so he knows what he's at. But then it turns out anyway that the following day, your man just didn't want to walk anymore. There was nothing wrong with his ankle. You know what I mean? He ended up he's like, oh no, it's fine. I think it's grand. I can walk now. And they ended up killing each other out there.
Oh no, I can imagine.
I personally would too. You know, I mean, I was about to call in the mountain rescue. You know?
Yeah, that's it.
I had to sleep
Oh,
outside here in the ditch. You know?
that's why I got the sleeping bag.
It's the one thing I never see though, and I'm sure you can agree with this, and that's what I mean. We can leave it there. That you look at all these survival kits on YouTube and bug out bags and 72-hour bags, and there's never a sleeping bag in it. Never.
No,
Never.
never. And
Never.
it's one thing I included in my little kind of essential
You did,
piece
yeah.
is even just a little orange survival bivvy bag as well. You know the survival bags.
Yeah. And even at that, you can get that little
sweat in it like a.
Oh, you will. You'll be like a Christmas ham. But like,
Exactly.
I would say that, like, you know, if you had that little survival bivvy, which is dirt cheap, and then you got yourself something like a snug pack, say just super cheap, the tropical blanket or the tropical sleeping bag that packs down to like this. So you got those two bad boys together. It's better than nothing. You know what I mean? It's
Well,
better.
there's a reason they have survival ratings on them as well. And the thing is, people might say, "Oh, it's not going to do anything." It's anything's going to be better than nothing, and
Yeah.
always being prepared is the best way. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for listeners in the winter is don't over prepare, but just look sensibly at what you are preparing for. You'll know what the the surrounding kind of weather entails. So whether you're in a wet area or a dry area. And I think that goes on to the nice point nicely, which I wanted to talk to you about, which was actually going on to just quickly using tools like the Helle, the Nordlys, for example, in colder weather, because there's a lot of nuance that goes to using tools in colder climates. Obviously, often we're using them with gloves or we're using them when our mobility might have started to reduce a little bit. And I guess we could kill two birds with one stone here, because you could have a little just explanation about how the Nordlys has tackled those, kept within those parameters of being a usable knife in the north, and those nuances of using a tool while you're in colder climates, because it's again something I've had some experience with. Obviously, I've had to use knives when wearing gloves, but generally speaking, I'm still using a 4 to 5 inch bushcraft blade. I'm adapting rather than using something specific for it. And although over here in the UK we might not want to go out and have our whole tool repertoire kit out for the winter, it's nice to know that you can have one or a few tools in your collection that would be suitable for colder weather climates. Because again, it's like you said, a saw, even in the cold, in some circumstances doesn't work as good. Maybe an axe might be a better choice.
An axe is always the better choice. But when my winter loadout, I start to switch from natural based materials to composite based materials.
That makes sense.
Just because of, like we talked about earlier, that just cold is always going to be damp. You know what I mean? Yes. You're going to get fluctuations in the temperature of the day, which is going to cause that damp to rise. So I tend to make a switch to more composite-based stuff. So
like my Carters.
Like my Carters, G10s, you know what I mean? Those kind of things. I tend to stay away from super steels, because super steels can be like that. In fact, just because I'm on this side of the table,
you can see because of their brittleness. Would you say?
Yeah, because those edges get so fine. Like, you got to think about it, that it's without getting into like metallurgy, but like, it's going to get colder at that edge because there's less material for it to heat up. You know what I mean? So that edge, if it's a very fine edge, like say like on like my favorite blade, which is the Paradous Spyderco Paramilitary 2. I tend to not take that out in the winter, and I swap it out more for I take the Victorinox Hunter, which is a composite handle. It's 3 mil thick, and it's got a saber ground. You know what I mean? It's a tank of a blade. It also is usable with mitts. Again, you're going to be using stuff with gloves, so don't be bringing out stuff that you have to take your gloves on and take your gloves off and take your gloves on and take your gloves off. Leave them on there.
It comes down to getting it out of the sheath, for example.
Exactly, which is why the Nord is shaped like it is, so you can 2-finger hook the end of it, and you can kind of pull it out. Yeah. Just basically like all knives in the Nord, so it allows you to get that pinch grip on it. But composites, And then I tend to steer away from the super steels because you can see from this side of the table that the complaints about edges chipping always rise in the colder months. They go that way. Yeah. Now, it's not such a big problem in the summer months for some reason, but in the winter months it is. And I learned.
Yeah, it's the same with silkies. You notice a lot more silky complaints in the colder weather because obviously they're not taking into consideration that the blade's going from cold to like it's getting friction.
Yeah. And those teeth are small. They're
Friction.
going to get cold very, very quick. And I learned that the hard way.
Change quickly.
I had a beautiful knife, one of the very first versions of the Verstalika Skrama, the bigger one. And I headed out into the Swedish winter and I started chopping, you know what I mean? And then that's also it as well, is that the reason why the Nord has such a steep Scandi on it is it's more akin to it, and a low Scandi too, compared to like, say, you see on other knives. It's because of that chopping thing. But then I forgot that like sometimes you're chopping into stuff and you don't know it's frozen. You might as well be hitting a house brick. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden your knife has got all these microchips all the way along it, you know, and it's like, oh, where's that coming from? Because it's a combination of one, that edge is getting super cold, and you're also winging it into stuff that's it's not the same. You could help me with this, because viscous is liquid, but I don't know what you would say for a solid material that's just getting more solid.
I guess like relative density.
Yeah, that's it. You know, the density is getting much on it, and like anybody can understand what I mean. If you've tried to stick your axe into a frozen stump, it just bounces. Yeah. You know what I mean? And your knife is no different. And unfortunately, in the winter months, I'd prefer a steeper Scandi like what's on the Nord, because like you could be battening through and it might be soggy on the outside, but there could be a lump of ice in the middle there that you just don't know about. And like the colder edges. The axe handles, I don't usually switch to composite axe handles, but that's why Fiskars is so popular here in the north, is because you don't want moisture getting in and freezing your axe handles and stuff like that. So composite handles, you know, you're not going to get that. I actually have to take all my axes off the wall here in the winter because we start using the fire and stuff like that, and actually put them outside. But I had a couple of knives from UK knife makers, and people can see what I'm talking about here. Is that they were in an axes from UK people, and I left them out in the shed, and all the heads shrunk just because it was so dry. You know what I mean?
And the relative humidity is just so different that when they were fitted, they were fit for a climate that's between, like you said earlier, 75 and
that's a massive amounts of humidity. Whereas as people like companies like Gransfors and Hultafors have had that figured out, because and I think that's why personally sometimes buying the Scandinavian axes is a little bit more leaning into it a little bit more, because they have to have that wood perfect. Because
it makes sense.
If you take a Gransfors axe to the UK, it's only going to get tighter because it's going to swell.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? But at least in these colder environments, it's not going to shrink. And it's kind of, that's something that people don't think about, but I only noticed when I came over here that all my European, or should I say non-Scandinavian axes, all just became rattly as shit. And I was like, no. So every year they have to get a BLO bath, you know what I mean? And
it's funny you say that, because I guess there's things people don't take into consideration. They might actually say, oh, the leather work on this is a tiny bit looser, and it's like, well, yeah, it's gained a little bit of room.
It's swelled up. It's
swelled up a little bit because of the relative humidity. We often take that for granted. That's really funny you say that, and I never actually really had kind of considered brands like Fiskars having moved to that composite material, fiberglass handles, mainly predominantly for that reason. It's a very,
like, I mean, up in Svalbard now, where you would see people use Fiskars, it's minus 31. You know what I mean? So it's drastically cold. Plus, also as well, you got to think that you start getting that tongue on a flagpole kind of vibe. You know what I mean? So you don't want your hands sticking to this, and that does happen. It does happen to me. Like the other day, I went out. That's why I always wear gloves. But in the day, it had thawed. So when I went out, I grabbed the lock off the shed and was just walking around with it. But then it froze to my glove. You know what I mean? So that's why I tend to switch to those. And I don't like. Sometimes it's better if you, and that's why most knives. It's a two-pronged thing, but stick tang knives are super popular. One, because it's easy, but also as well is that people didn't like exposed metal for that reason on their handles. So the complete wooden handle is like with the with the other smaller Helle knives. You know, there's ones
Maybe
that
like more rat tail, would they?
yeah, they're more rat tail because they're meant to be kind of farming knives. You know, so you don't
Yes.
want any exposed steel in that, which is going to weld itself to your hand, or you get an ice burn because like you got to imagine that as well. And maybe it's just an education for why things are different around the world. But if you're up in Svalbard, say, and it's -29, and it gets down to -30 here, and I could be out in the yard for 3-4 hours, that tang is going to be so goddamn cold, you know. And if you touch that with a sweaty hand now, it's just going to weld itself to your hand.
Yeah, see, there's a whole different level of things you have to, appreciate and I guess design around there. And
Yeah, and it's just again, it's one of those anecdotes. I to the Swedes, it's common knowledge. You know, what I mean,
yeah,
to
of
the
course.
Norwegians, it's common knowledge. But Joe had to weld a couple of knives to his hand to be like, ah, yes, I see.
I love it, and I guess that's one of the beautiful pieces about the the Nordlys is it's so refined, that metal as well. Even on the handle, there's hardly any
It
metal.
is,
So
but then again, the Nord was meant to be a Scandinavian knife that guys like us could use in the UK. So
exactly,
exposing
it's,
that tang
it's
is
a crossover.
totally fine. You know what I mean? But
And
maybe if
I
you
noticed,
go for it.
sorry, no, go ahead.
No, but I said maybe if you're in -40, you might want to consider something that's a bit of an enclosed tang. But that's why
Yeah,
Falcon even make them that way. You know.
but then I guess it's still big enough to be used with a glove, which is a lovely thing about
And
it. And
you nailed it. That was the compromise we made, or the compromise that was made. It's like, right, well, if it's going to be a full tank, we'll make sure that you can use it with a proper full set of mitts, and then that way you can negate around that too.
yeah, exactly. So that I guess that could be one of your little, I guess, points that you had to, or what's the word that I'm trying to use it? I hate it when words evade me. I need my thesaurus to hand. But it's one of those little kind of sacrifices, I guess, you had to make and say, well, let's expose some of that tang. Let's give it the strength of that, so it's going to be up for the grunt of when people like yourself or myself are batoning through wood and we're
Mm,
hacking through timber, or we might just be quickly making a withy and say we're not getting the saw out, let's just hack through that,
mm.
make a quick coppice. So it's got all of that, but then it's also staying in that traditional line of being usable with bigger kit on, which is
It is, and you want to stay traditional too. Like, I mean, I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. And if you
of
wanted to
course,
make it a kind of a true cold weather knife, well, then you have to really start looking into overmolding. And
yeah,
overmolding is just not on Helly's books. They prefer to work with bone and reindeer and antler and natural materials and
yeah,
so on. So, if we were going to make an overmolded version, it would just be a classic stick tang, which is like the original
that makes
overmold. You
sense.
know, you see it more in these rubber overmolds nowadays, but you know that's
Well,
the
it's nice to see the freedom of like a bit of artistry that it gives a company like that as well. I noticed that with the wood scales, it's evidently from one piece of timber.
yeah.
It's beautiful how it crosses. It just
Mm.
flows through the handle. Even with that separation of the full tang, it's got great symmetry, and it's just
Oh, it's
very pleasing
gorgeous.
to the eye.
Yeah, and it's I'd
So,
love to get you over, Liam. We're planning something really nice at the factory, hopefully next year. And you
would
know,
love
I can't hint at it, but like opening it up to members of the public. It's just because it's still
that's incredible.
on the drawing board. But then you will get to see that like naturally you don't want to lose that heritage either. So yeah, and that's what I love about Heli because it's the same as like Savoda. Is that right, Joe? You know, there's this beautiful birch that we get handpicked from forests in Finland and then Norway, and it's bookmarked and it's aged like wine, and they can watch it. You know, they have an expert there who
Yeah,
keeps an eye on this wood as it
I
goes.
love it.
They have a whole room full of antlers. Look, a crazy amount of antlers that
Don't tell
they're
me that.
watching. Yeah, it's insane. But then they got a guy in there who knows the material as well and everything else. So
That's so important.
I like the fact that they're like, hey, you can build whatever you want, but it's staying within these. We're not going to be starting to import rubber from Polynesia or pellets from
Yeah.
Germany, and that's just not going to happen. And that's exciting then to be able to work on projects like things like the Nord and that, and see how close you can get to building a stealth fighter, but just with wood and bone. I think it's very very cool. And that being said, there is a new one on the way out. There's first exclusive here that I wanted to say. And this one, I definitely want to get into your hands in the early stages. But there's been a massive demand, and this is the great thing about Helle too. Like, I'm on Facebook, and I just want to say this: I'm on Facebook. I'm on the development team. I talk to the guys. We're in meetings every week. So if there is, whether it's a criticism, a complaint, or whatever, you can find me all around the internet on all the different knife forums, and especially on the Helle page. Come along and say, hey, this could be made better. That's the only way that it's going to be done. And because of this feedback,
that's vital.
A new knife on the way, something that I do have sketches for here next to me, but I can't show you. But it's going to be a bird and trout knife, and that in itself is has been an interesting one.
I can imagine.
But it is, because people don't really think about it, because a bird and a trout knife, you either make one that's beautiful or you make one that works.
So that's it.
It's
the spectrum.
It is. So there's
the wrong end, unfortunately.
those who are listening here, that I've been involved with this one from conception, and it's based off some ideas that have been kind of kicking around, and ideas from talking to guys like you, Liam, and guys like John Jeffries, and people like Andy, who's a ranger over in Ireland, and because there's two camps when it comes to the bird and trout knife. Because of how people have used them. So you go to some people and they're like, oh, I love my bird and trout knife, and it's actually built for purpose. And then there's other guys out there like, oh no, I hate them because they're just meant to be fancy, or they're just really tiny knives that you can't actually do anything with a bird or a trout. You know what I mean? So it's been trying to find the marriage of the two, but that's coming. There's a
that's amazing. I bet that's been, like you said, quite a battle in itself, because we all know too well how many 5-minute experts there are out there, or how many opinions there are out there on, especially within the kind of field sports area. It's quite a contentious place to bring up a new development, or or kind of go against the mainstream. So I'm not saying that you're going against the mainstream with it, but it's nice to see. It would be really nice to see what you guys have put together, because
it is. But it's because of that feedback loop. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I can imagine with the feedback, because I know how important it is to you to get that. You've always been very transparent about that, and I think it's what makes having you on board with Helle like so valuable to them, obviously, because you're that kind of middleman between the people on the field using it, like obviously you and myself using the blade yourself, more so, but then there's the actual end consumer, and it's nice to have someone who yourself is approachable, who's directly involved, because all too often it can go to a content creator, and that's kind of where it stops. The feedback kind of stops at the content creator. So it's nice that I can then relay that to you through the podcast, and also that you've invited people to contact yourself directly. I think that's a very important part for a company to be.
It works though. I think people, if you're a designer or an aspiring designer of anything, that you don't know it all. You might have a lot of experience to bring to the table. You might, definitely know how to Lego pieces together. But to say that, like, oh, well, I'm a designer of anything, whether it be clothes, knives, boots, it doesn't really matter. And to say, like, yeah, I'm an expert in snow, and I'm an expert in the forest, and I'm an expert, it's impossible. You know what I mean? You're never.
There's these powerhouses, isn't there? Like in the field sport, you've got your Berettas, and I'm not saying any names and any negative connotations here. I'm just saying you've got your established big giant kind of. They're the ones pushing the races all the time. Remington, brands like that, Pro Bass and stuff. Big brands that it's sometimes hard to break the taboo that those guys have instilled, and it's not because they've instilled it to be kind of their way, right is might, or might is right. Sorry, but it's just that loads of consumers are used to a certain line that a product generally, or a certain route that a product takes. So to come into it from I guess like with a different background, for example, Helle, they've got their hunting background very well and truly, and you can see that in, again, the Nordlys, how its thin blade retains that ability to work with fish to
Mm.
again the history of the Lakers. Again, like you said, seal work, isn't it? So
Mm. It's all still work, and it's important though, because like I think, like you said, that's how, like, these design, like Samuel Colt, the guy who designed the Colt Peacemaker, great quote from him. I think, what was it? He's like, God made man, but Samuel Colt made them even.
made them eat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's great. But it was
yeah,
because, I mean, Colt knew what he knew about guns. But I mean, you can't say that a man who's put so much into learning how to be an engineer and metallurgist and so on is the same as a six shooter who's just target shooting all day, every day. And I think that's why, because I've been inspired by those particular type of companies like Helle, and that's why I'm very lucky. Is like 9 years ago when I first started into this space, Helle was the company that as I popped out of a bird with an egg, kind of gravitated to, and the DD Gagoon and stuff like that. And I was inspired by the fact that, like, hey, you're really going to come up with a great product. Like, Jaguar is a fine example of it, and I'm not getting into much what's going on there. But because they at the very least, regardless of whether people agree with anything that Jaguar is doing at the moment, you can clearly see that they've stepped away from anybody who knows anything about cars and the car market.
yes,
Like,
yeah,
the end user has left the conversation. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And I think that
100%.
it's
I think
super important, and very little companies do it at the moment. But it's great to see that. Like, for example, Sasta. I love Sasta, but it was so great when we were over there when they were developing this new hunting line. That,
yeah,
yes, the textile workers were able to make sure that it was stitched perfectly, technical stitching, overlocking, all the boxing, pattern cutters, experts in their field. But then eventually they went out to members of the Finnish hunting team and even just regular farmers, and they were like, right, take this. And we went out hunting with them for the day, and they had some feedback on clothes that they already had on them for 3 or 4 months.
so important.
And then you hit it at the end of the day, because it's nice to have something that will perform well. Like, there's no doubt that Jaguar can build a car, but then you need to know what the end user also wants from the car. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there comes a point when they kind of you know again, those powerhouses or big names can sometimes lose touch with reality, and they're more worried about kind of ESG scores and getting funding from the investors
But
than
like,
they
I
are
mean, like,
how it's received.
yeah, I fish a handful of times in the year. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I haven't hunted in a couple of years, and so there's no sense in me drawing on my personal experience. Now I can when it comes to knives and materials and stuff like that. But someone like yourself, or Steve Armstrong or Andy, like Andy's a gamekeeper. He's going through deer and pheasants like nobody's business. I guarantee I
Yes,
could text Andy now, and he's gutting something. You know what I mean? So why would I not ask him? Say, here, look, this is what I've made. What do you
yes,
think of it? And,
yeah,
like, for example, there was a project I was involved in, and I couldn't get this leap in functionality. And then
right,
Andy came along to me and he said, "Oh, but if you add this, well, that means that people then can use it here, and they can use it here, and you can use it here." And then I was like, yeah, okay, well, if I take that piece of metal out and I increase the size of this lanyard hole and I do this, and we're like, will that work? And he's like, oh, that'd be perfect. There's nothing on the market that's like that. This is always the problem, having to find a place for these particular things in this particular situation. And I was like,
that's
genius. But I guarantee you it will resonate. But I would never have caught that in my uh, low key hobbyist level of,
mhm,
going
mhm.
out hunting and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's often how like the best kind of the best little changes or designs are come up with, just through a necessity. Often you
Mm.
see something kind of jerry rigged together by someone. You're like, oh, damn it, they're onto something.
The jerry rigs are the best. That's one of my favorite things about going to classes, is seeing people who have had to solve problems on their own, and
Yeah.
the ingenious ways they do it, because there's magic in madness. You know what
Yeah,
I
well, it's kind of
mean?
very much like the IRL streaming scene, and you well, I've got a backpack, for example. I walk around, and I had to figure a way of having my Orange Pi 5 computer
Mm,
running in there with everything else surrounded, well, it's held in place while I'm walking, with enough room so the fans didn't get swamped by the fabric of the bag or anything I put in there. So I ended up getting like a baseball cap like carrier. So for
yeah.
people who really love their American baseball caps, you can get kind of soft hard shell boxes for them, like display boxes. So for people traveling, they can carry like 8 caps at a time. So I got one of those, and I've installed computer fans into that so it can ventilate.
Savage.
I've got like Molly panels all velcroed inside that I can slip all my
Class.
box and network things. And again, it's just one day there will be a backpack that is specifically designed for that. But at the moment, it's just been such a fun process, kind of just piecing things together. So I can guess it's on a small scale, very similar to what you have to do with a knife. And when you have to go down to that design process, you're kind of pulling up, in drawing or in sketch, I guess, you're pulling off them scales. You're saying, right, let's have a look at this skeleton. Where's the weight reduction we can do without mitigating strength? What part of this is wasted, hardly ever used? How can we maximize the use or efficiency on
that's
that?
it.
So I'm really excited to hear what you're or to see what you've been up to with this.
No, it'll be cool.
Knife.
It'll be definitely cool. And there's like naturally the limited editions and all that are coming out in April, but it's been really fun because the you know yourself, Liam, like it's great that you've got into this Twitch thing, and I'm sure that it's given you a new fervor, a new excitement for the outdoor space, because eventually, like, you'll never reach the walls of learning in the outdoor space, but then, you can reach the walls of what you're currently working on. And now with this job with Helle, the chances of being able to sit down and have conversations with you off the record, or have a reason to call up somebody like Andy and say, Andy, right, walk me through your entire day as a gamekeeper. What are you doing? And then even like getting to go out and say, right, can I join you for a day? Can you show me? Can I bring some? And like now all of a sudden it's opened doors to other places that I wouldn't have looked in, or now I'm trying to arrange some time there's a guy that tracks wolves in my area here, and I want to hook up with him and say, right, like, here, look, let's go out and we'll do a few bits, do a bit of gamekeeping. I'm not saying I haven't approached any of the elk hunters because it's a bird and trout. There's a local ice fishing team just down the road from me, so they all ice fish at this particular lake. I've never had a reason to go ice fishing, or I don't even want to maybe particularly ice fish, I know how to do it, but is it something I do on a Saturday when I could be sitting in here reading a book? Maybe not. But now I get to go out and spend some time with these folk and say, right, well, show me how you run through the day. What knives are you using? What are you using them for? What could be done better?
Yeah,
and that's been real exciting. I've got to meet some of the most awesome people, as you know. Like, I mean, there's so many people in this space that aren't on social media, that don't have YouTube channels, that don't do this. Like, all the local boys around here are all like in their 60s, and just have been doing this since they were 16. Like, there's a guy down the road from me, for example, that I want to have a chat with about axes. He makes his own axes. He processes all his own wood, but like, he chopped his thumb off when he was a kid, with an axe, and he had to cross country ski 12 kilometers in the snow to the hospital to get it fixed and stuff. All those boys are still alive in this area around here, I've never had a reason to go talk to them, but when you show up with a tool roll full of knives and you're like, right, let's go ice fishing and tell me what you think about these, that it's been really, really beautiful. I'd love to be able to capture these guys, but it's not their forte, you know what I mean? But it's given me a new passion for it.
Yeah, and it's the thing is, it won't be lost on you, which is the nice thing. It's I know their experiences and all of the information that they pass on is gonna. It all ends up in the right space with you. That's a good thing.
And the one thing, just to finish up on the,
it's nice that it's going to someone that's
it is, but just to finish up on the cold thing, is that all these guys that I've been out with, and there's been a few of them over the past 2 years, every single one of them always had 2 pairs of socks in their hunting bag. All of them, every time. I even a local hunter had passed away, sadly. He had passed away, sadly. A guy called Victor, and his stuff went up for auction. And you might have seen this leather bag that I sit on in some of the videos that I have at the moment. That's Victor's. And when we bought it, we got it home, and it was super cool because it still had his medication in it. But there they were, 2 pairs of socks in the side pocket. Can't go wrong with an extra pair of socks.
Definitely. Like we said before, it's like simple things like that are the difference between a hell of a miserable trip and a great one.
Amen to that, dude. Amen to that. But it's been a pleasure, my man. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It has been an absolute pleasure. I mean, is there any little last minute key takeaways that you want to remind the the listeners of, whether it's to do with Helle, your social media, anything you've released, anything you've been up to or are going to be up to, the usual where people can find you. And honestly, a huge thank you for your input into this conversation. It's it's never a dull conversation when we
Thank you. Thank you
get
so
into
much, man.
depths on something, and
No,
you've got some
the
great points
Wodesman
of view.
the Wodesman audience has always been incredibly supportive, and they make themselves known on my social media
Brilliant.
platforms. But when it comes to Helle, I mean, there's plenty of support there. But when it comes to myself, my beautiful lady has been working on a book for the past year, taking
Oh, fantastic.
taking one of it's a bestseller here in Scandinavia, and she's taken it and added all new knowledge to it, all new recipes to it, all new pictures to it. It's a massive book. It is going to be released preliminarily towards the end of this month, so there'll be a thing she'll talk about it. So if people wanted to show a bit of support or a bit of a thumbs up for the knowledge on these things, if they could join up to the newsletter, that would be great. The newsletter is where you find all that.
If you share the link with me, I'll put that at the top of the description for the show notes. So as you guys will see on the show notes, there'll be a link there if you follow that. So that will sign them up to the newsletter to get any information about the release.
Because I'm involved in so much stuff, we've decided to condense it down to the newsletter. But the big project now that we'll be focusing on next year, as in myself and Anita, will be the promotion of this book. And it's just truly. It's a truly little fantastic book, and it's great that it's moving out of, I'd say, little book. It's massive, but like that it's moving out of Scandinavia, all based around outdoor cooking. You know what I mean? So it's going to be
huge congratulations to her.
Yeah, it's amazing. Congratulations.
I know she'll be happy to know that I'll be getting a copy, and if there's some recipes in there, I'll be trying them out in some trips in the future as well. So. Honestly, again, a huge thank you. And is there any other videos that you yourself would like to point the viewers to do with cold weather gear that you've done on your channel, or should they just have a little flick through your repertoire?
Yeah, they're more than welcome.
Quite a big back catalogue.
Yes, I have quite a big back catalogue. But no, I have to say, I just want to personally at the end of this year say, not bar to mention this book, but I don't want to promote myself. I just want to say a massive thank you to the Wodesman audience. They have supported me and Ida over the course of this year. I get to come back on the show and talk to you about these things. So it's more of a thank you from me to your listeners to say that they're always polite, full of tips and tricks themselves. Some have reached out to me. Some have actually become good friends. You know what I mean? And I'm very thankful to that, and I hope your listeners have a very Merry Christmas and don't get frostbite. Hopefully we can prevent a bit of frostbite now over the winter months. But just a thank you from me and Anita to you guys and the listeners of the show. Regardless of if you follow me or not, it's always great to come on and talk to everybody here.
Well, there we are, guys. So that's Joe, obviously, from In Forest and Lands, and you heard from him. There's a newsletter. If you guys could go and listen, sign up to that would be greatly appreciated, and we can all support Ida's new and upcoming book. I'm very excited to see all the little stories and little bits of tradition hidden in there as well. So yeah, guys, as Joe said, a massive Merry Christmas to you all, and there will probably be a short little clip now following after this from Tom when he was out on a trip in his local woodland with a he was building a single solo shelter. I will be joining him later in January, I think, to build one opposite him, and we'll be having a nice camp. So that would be nice to catch up and see it in the flesh. So that's all from me now, guys. But just remember, the wilderness doesn't change for us, but it rewards those who embrace its challenges. Amen. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Joe, again, massive thank you. Merry Christmas to you and Ida over there.
You too, dude.
And to all the Wodesman listeners, I'll catch you on the next one.
So hey guys, Tom here with the Wodesman podcast, and I'm actually coming to you from the woods on the 15th of December on a little solo camp. I've decided to head out before all the festivities and merriment for Christmas begins on a little solo adventure. So I headed to the woods and built myself a sort of survival shelter. Didn't bring any form of tarp or anything with me. And I got here at lunchtime and I worked for a good number of hours to build a debris shelter. I've insulated it with debris from the ground, so leaves, twigs, clay, everything that I could just scoop up in a big pile and pile on. Now, to waterproof a shelter, it's normally a good idea to go way more than you think. I normally try and aim for sort of an arm's depth to be really sure. I've done it to my elbow on this shelter, so I wouldn't say it's fully waterproof, but it's definitely windproof and it would hold up to light rain and showers. And the forecast is looking unlikely for anything heavier than showers, so I'm very confident in the shelter's ability to keep me dry and cosy. I put steep sides on the shelter so that if it does rain it can drip down and keep me nice and toasty inside. So I just thought I'd check in with you guys. It's nice for us to do the round the fire little catch-ups when we can, and sadly Liam couldn't join me today. We're definitely gonna do some shelter build stuff like this together again soon, but yeah, I thought while I'm by myself I'd just tune in, have a little chat to you, and yeah, let you know what's been going on. So I've been doing a lot of shelter work actually recently, because I now run a bushcraft club each week, and I do bushcraft lessons in the afternoon most weeks actually, with year 5 and 6, so sort of 10-year-olds, and I get them out building dens and teaching them little shelters and knots and things like that, and fire lighting. So it's been really rewarding to share my love for bushcraft with young people, and I thought it's going to be Christmas soon. It's going to be really busy, sort of socialising and seeing family, and I always love this time of year, but it's going to stop me getting to the woods for a little while. So I thought, why not head to the woods, practice what I preach, and build myself a shelter and spend the night in it, just by myself, peace and quiet, and just me and a skill to practice. So that's what I did. You can probably hear my voice is quite husky because I've been fighting off a cold, and I was sort of umming and ahhing whether or not it was sensible to come to do a sort of shelter build solo overnighter when I haven't been that well, and I've had sort of cold after cold, but to be honest, I think the fresh air is doing me a world of good, and I just feel rejuvenated being outside. I love a bit of the sort of thrill you get for being sort of a solo on an overnighter. It sort of does give you that thrill. Even though we're in my woods, it's that sort of you're surrounded by the darkness. You really have to immerse yourself in the environment. So I'm not going to talk to you for too long. I just wanted to check in really and let you know that we haven't forgotten about you. We're planning some Wodesmans very soon, and hopefully this will be embedded in an episode that you guys can get around the sort of Christmas period, Christmas, New Year sort of area, because we always like to do the busholutions and things as well, so no doubt we'll be asking for your busholutions soon. But yeah, this is just sort of a little in the woods message to you to say, if you get a chance to go out and practice a skill in the woods before Christmas, do it. There's always an excuse to not go, and to sort of stay home, stay warm, and not push yourself out your comfort zone. But I think it's always worthwhile, and when you get to the woods, it's you remember the thrill and the joy that you get from doing these things. And I've been teaching these sort of shelters, and we've made a number of different designs. We've made miniature shelters, we've made full-size shelters, but obviously I had a team of kids to help me thatch it and things, so it's nice to do it all by myself and really remind myself of the effort that goes into building one of these proper shelters, and like fiddling with angles and stuff. So initially I wasn't happy. I started off with like a 45-degree angle, which would have allowed me to like lay down fully in it, and I decided to actually increase that angle and make it steeper, so that if it does rain, it would shed the water better. So playing around these things, it's only really by doing them. You can read a million books and things, and until you've made a good number of shelters yourself and you've felt the effort that goes into lugging the wood around and selecting your site and having it near the resources you need and sort of scooping up all the leaves and how much thatching material you need, until you actually go and do it and you practice it and you do it a lot, it is all just theory. So this is sort of just a little call to action if you get a chance to go and practice a skill. Could be anything, could be fire steel and Vaseline cotton balls, it could be making coffee, it could be identifying 5 trees, it could be going for a camp in a tent, it could be doing your first solo overnighter, because it is daunting the first time you do a solo camp and you're there by yourself and you only have yourself to rely on. You don't have the distraction of socialising and talking to other people to hide things that you might not be as competent with or confident with. So whatever it is, set yourself a little goal, and maybe before Christmas or after Christmas, see if you can get out there, see if you can practice that skill or overcome that obstacle or whatever it is. Even if it's just you feel you haven't been to the woods enough, just see if you can get out, go for a walk, go for a hike, whatever it is. And yeah, as always, look after yourselves. I've had a fantastic time. I'm just tucking into a Christmas ale, Marks and Spencer's Christmas ale, and I've got some peanuts. I've just had a steak sandwich. I've got some peanuts for dessert. I've got a nice big fire in front of my shelter, and I'm just sitting on my reindeer hide now, talking to you. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully this is accompanied with an episode where I haven't got such a croaky hoarse voice, because I'm really fighting off a cough. But anyway, Merry Christmas to you all. Thanks for listening, and yeah, I look forward to getting out and practicing more of these skills and sharing that with you in the new year.